All right, well, welcome everybody. This is the sixth iteration of the Eastern Region Mentorship Group. My name is Lieutenant Commander Teresa Carpenter. I am one of two Eastern Region Mentorship Coordinators. My co-host, Commander Charlie Dre, is not able to be with us today, but sends his regards. And we have an amazing guest for you guys today. We try to have a different speaker every month to talk about another area of expertise within the public affairs community. We go for approximately an hour. Sometimes we'll go a little shorter than that, just depending on the flow of the conversation. And then the last 15 minutes or so, we always like to open it up for questions for things that you guys have, or for some things that I may have not covered down upon. And I'll do the same thing for you, Dave. I'll give you a chance to cover down on something that I didn't ask, or something that the group didn't ask that you think is important to this conversation. So today's topic is what makes an engaging story that reporters want to cover. So we all think we know what a reporter wants to cover, but it's a lot different being on that other side and dealing with the deadlines that they have, or the angles that their editors might have. And we want to make sure that what we're doing is pitching to them the stories that are meaningful, that'll get the engagement that they need for their readership, or the things that are really of concern to their audience, not necessarily, and it's not always the same thing that is of our concern. So that's the focus of today's conversation. I have with me today Dave Ress. He's been covering military issues. He's been a reporter for many, many years. He's the author of 4 books. Got a PhD in history, and his area of expertise was Australia and U.S. history. But he's been covering state government, economics, and he's been a reporter in Virginia since 1990. And then for 10 years, he was a correspondent for Reuters in Montreal, London, and Nairobi. So welcome, Dave. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, I'm really happy to be here. I guess for background, I'll tell you a couple things. I took over the military and shipyard beat here in Hampton Roads for the 2 papers here, the Daily Press and Newport News, which is my home paper, and the Virginian-Pilot, with which we've basically merged about 2 years ago. I've not covered the military before. I have done a little bit, and spending so much time in Newport News, you really do have to know a bit about the shipyard and a couple of very large non-naval military operations here, the Fort Eustis and Langley Air Force Base. But to really get down to sort of understanding the military is and particularly the Navy, is something I've not had that much of a chance to do. And one of the things that I have found is that the team of the group of the public affairs officers in this part of the world have been extremely helpful and extremely patient, sort of helping me figure out what from the outside looks like a fairly complicated organization. One of the things that sort of struck me is that I think for papers like the Daily Press and the Virginian-Pilot, I think we have a different kind of interest in the Navy than in many of the entities that are probably the most prominent in covering the Navy and the military generally. And this is going very preliminarily, sort of looking at what, say, the Washington Post or the New York Times or the several publications like USNI, which has been a terrific help learning my way around, or Navy Times, military.com. I'm very interested in what sailors here are doing. And I think you will find, if you're in, I guess we're the Eastern group, so you guys are not in San Diego, but if you're in other important Navy centers like Mayport, I'm going to embarrass myself and forget some of the other important ones in this region, Patuxent. I think you're going to find that what reporters are interested in is what the people on base in the area are doing. And one of the things that I've found is that it's you know, I keep running into sailors who are who just know an awful lot of stuff, and they know how to they they've learned a lot. They've been able to apply a lot of really refined skills. I usually sort of sum up when I'm trying to explain to a PAO the kind of thing I'm interested in, saying, you know, I love being at a story where I'm talking to a sailor and I'm seeing how that sailor solves a problem. I think those are great stories, and I've tried to do as many of them as I can. And I think from my suspicion is that as professional, you know, naval officers and professional communicators, you know all this stuff, and there's a chance that because of where you are within the Navy, that it seems ordinary to you. And I guess the fundamental thing I'd want to tell you is it ain't ordinary, and it ain't ordinary at all. And so I think some of you may be surprised at how much of what your sailors do and how much of what the civilian support that are also an important part of the Navy's effort here in the East do is really, really interesting. In addition to obviously being really, really important. Teresa, do you want me to talk a little bit about how I've been trying to find my way around the Navy and how those interactions have worked, or does that help out at all?
Yeah, that does, actually. If you want to just kind of go into sort of how you've approached, since you're relatively new to covering the Navy in this region, I would be interested in understanding a little bit more about how you immersed yourself into our community and what you found were, like you said, the most intriguing stories about our sailors. That would be good.
Okay. I mean, it's been, I've kind of done it the way that I'm well, I mean, it's different nowadays just because to some extent there's so much, it's so easy to find things on, you know, through our online or digital resources. So I try to keep up with Hampton Roads based Navy operations through I think we call it the DIBIDS, the DBIDS service. I've tried to, you know, I pay very close attention to any press releases that I get. And I try as well to monitor social media feeds. That feels funny to me because I'm, and you guys, I apologize, by the way, for the black and white and the terrible lighting.
Yes, I meant to address that in the beginning of the call. My apologies. But yes, for the people that are watching this recording later on, we think that the content is more important than the picture screen. So we're just rolling with it and hoping that you'll get a lot of value out of this, regardless of the face-to-face. And when we go back to a unpandemic environment, we'll try to do some more of these face-to-face for you guys.
If it wasn't color, you would see the gray hair, and so you know the idea of, wow, you know, that I got to pay attention to that Twitter feed, that Facebook feed is a new thing for me. And in fact, I'll tell you, I was afraid I was going to be a little bit late today because I had an interview with Rear Admiral Robertson out with the Eisenhower Strike Group. Set first thing for this morning, had to kind of bump back really close to this. And I thought I'd tell you a little bit about how that kind of generated. The Eisenhower Strike Group has a very good Twitter feed, lots of photos of operations, lots of you know, fairly lighthearted sort of tweets that go with them. One of the recent ones, more recent ones, is a shot of I think it's a Super Hornet on the flight deck at night and talking about a flight deck party. You know, they aren't serious and they aren't heavy, but they are a way of sort of saying the strike group is here. They're doing this kind of thing, and so when I saw about a week or two back that they had come through the Suez Canal fairly soon after the canal reopened, and we're operating in the Red Sea. I thought, oh, it's a good excuse. Let me just ping them and say, hey, what are you doing? How's it going in the Red Sea? We had done a story off of a press release about operating with the, I'm going to get the acronym wrong, with the multinational force that's still dealing with cleaning up ISIS. When they were in the Eastern Med, they were flying missions there. And so I was curious about, well, does moving down into the Red Sea mean different kinds of missions? And then a day or two back, I got a call from the PAO with the carrier strike group, saying, hey, love a chance to chat. And it turned out, and then I was able to see this with some of the more recent tweets, that they've been doing some joint operations with French carrier, Charles de Gaulle. And there are other great photos. There's on the Twitter feed, there's a photo of a French helicopter coming in and supplying a destroyer from the Eisenhower strike group that's actually operating with the French. The Eisenhower is in the Arabian Sea. The Charles de Gaulle is in the Gulf, and so they kind of swapped some ships around, which is part of what ultimately what the story is going to be about. I think is that you can have groups from two different navies, two different allied navies, and by operating together in quite in a way that you might not immediately think of, an American destroyer near a French carrier, doing things that to this landsman seem like a big deal. A helicopter hovering above a ship floating on the water, bouncing around, and able to safely deliver supplies to that ship. It probably seems like old hat to any of you who are used to dealing with a helicopter squadron. For me, with probably an overactive imagination, it's a big deal. And to say that part of what interoperability means, which is a term that I will see in a press release, and it's sometimes hard to explain, is a way of making something very concrete to readers who are not all in the Navy, but who are in this Navy town very interested in what you all are doing. Which is me being long-winded and saying that there are, for me, there are clues, whether it's in a press release, whether it's in a tweet or a social media post, whether it's in a DVIDs item, that I'm eager to jump on and say, there's a story here. There's a way of going beyond what are often really excellent DVIDs news stories, to say, let's make that additional leap that speaks not only to the generally military community that is watching DVIDs, to the broader public. For what it's worth, the reaction I get from readers is they're really interested in this. They really like to know what their sailors are doing. For that matter, what their soldiers and airmen and coasties are doing as well. And I just think I think they're good stories. They're interesting stories. They're people stories, and they're also about some of the most important things that our government does, that our Defense Department does, and that the Navy in particular does. Again, I've been very long-winded, and I'm worried about outwearing welcome. I don't know if we should ask her questions at this point or start a conversation. What's easiest? Yeah,
I can. Well, what I'm first going to do is I'm going to repeat back some of the parts of your explanation that really stood out to me, and in terms of how we cover things. It's wonderful to hear that Ike is employing such a great Twitter strategy. I can tell you that Twitter is not always the easiest medium for a carrier at sea to be using. So I think, my hats off are to them for doing that. And we all know that Twitter is where a lot of our reporters are getting their news. So it is really important we stay active on that medium. The other thing that I heard is that sometimes you're absolutely right, Dave, the day-to-day interoperability exercises that we do, they tend to be, sometimes we can talk about them, sometimes we can't, but for the ones that we can, we should. And I think that's what you're saying here, because, it is actually kind of surprising to me that a local newspaper would be interested in such a high level interoperability exercise with a foreign country or a partner. And that's really heartwarming to know that too, because I think sometimes at the carrier level, we tend to put a lot of focus on our sailors and on our Facebook page. And what I'm hearing from you is that we need to get out there and use our divots, use Twitter, and use other ways to reach our publics. And then when the reporters follow up after they've seen some things that we've been putting out, they might lend themselves to another aspect or another angle that we hadn't thought of. I mean, maybe we're just looking at it from this perspective, but the benefit of cooperating with reporters like yourself is you can, your audience better than we do sometimes, and you can let us know what your readers are curious about. What are they telling you that is interesting to them? So I think that's amazing, and I appreciate the explanation. So no, you're not long-winded in the slightest, because that's certainly something for us to keep in mind when we're pitching to reporters, is that you guys might come back with another aspect. And I will say I found you and got interested in your story because you put out a story about the passing of the sword with Commander Craig and Commander Tisdale, and that was such a wonderful tradition that a lot of people don't know about. So I'm curious, and this is going to move over to the human interest angle and sort of to the sailor side, because that's more of a sailor story, even though it was about officers. What was the reception to that story? Because that's not something that I think a lot of people even know about.
Yeah, no, people like that a lot. It was, I got some very nice feedback about that. I think, again, this is Hampton Roads is a Navy town, and part of what where I'm lucky covering this beat is that there's a very high level of interest in anything to do with the Navy. I think, I heard from I particularly tend to hear from kind of retired sailors and retired officers, and they like that story a lot. I think I'm not sure it's a universal tradition, but it's something that a lot of people sort of know about, and they liked hearing it. There were a couple of aspects to it too that I kind of liked and really new to me, and that's that this particular sword was passed largely through what I think we call limited duty officers, and this group I find really kind of fascinating, and I find it fascinating because so many of them are what I think we still call Mustangs, which whenever I run across them, I had always thought it was really rare. It actually seems to be less rare than I thought, but I keep thinking, 18, 19-year-old joins the Navy, enlists, is a really sharp sailor, really with it, becomes clearly identified as this is someone who can become an officer and become a leader, even in a different way than the leadership that I see. I don't know this. I hope this doesn't sound patronizing, but fairly far down the rank ladder. I mean, it's I've run into third class petty officers. I never remember the E number score precisely enough, but a third class or second class petty officer who is like a leader, and that's like, whoa, that's another expectation that I had walking into this that got dashed right away. Leadership starts pretty early on in a Navy career. So anyway, that was an interesting aspect of that story to me as well. One thing, I think, Teresa, I had sent a story I did about the Stennis, who sort of an example of a story that I came across, and that one was a somewhat grumpy retired captain who is something of a skeptic about the Navy's aircraft carriers. I assume he's an old black shoe, but who had spotted the Stennis there at the pier and was going on about what's it doing there? It's just tied up there forever, and why is it doing that? And so I gave Joe Hans over there a call and said, hey, what's going on? And that was initially it was a really nice chance to sort of visit and kind of walk through a carrier that's in the probably mid-stage or early stages of getting set for a refueling and complex overhaul. And this was just a follow-up. The story I sent that I sent to you, Teresa, just sort of saying, hey, how's it going? I think you're coming over to Newport News in the spring. And I think that what prompted that follow-up was a video that the captain did, just sort of updating people on, what's the situation with COVID, how we doing. He had mentioned something that I had not been aware of. I sort of knew that some of the Stennis sailors have been off the ship and working with, it turned out to be 15 other commands. I had seen a couple on a jaunt out to the Ford when it was doing some post-delivery testing stuff, but I hadn't realized the extent of it. Hadn't realized until I saw that video that it included a detachment from the weapons unit to the new British carrier, the Queen Elizabeth, and that they'd been doing work with they'd been doing support work for an Italian carrier that's in Norfolk, doing the qualifications to take on, I think, F-35s. So it was worth doing the update. It's worth getting a sense of. There's a big project coming up with the refueling. That's going to be a big deal for Newport News. Mm-hmm. And what those guys are doing, what those sailors are doing when they're at the pier, and at the pier at the point now when the carrier is no longer able to move. The rudder won't turn anymore. I assume it's locked in position. It's going to be, the tugs are going to take it over across the Hampton Roads. But they're still doing a lot of work, and it turns out that they're going to be doing about a third of the work of the whole RCOH over the 4-year process of that, which is something that I think people just don't know, including even a retired Navy captain.
Sure.
And so that was also, and that's a particularly important part of life here in Newport News, which is where I live and where I've been working for many years now. But it also tells you something on the other side of the water, where you're more used to sort of thinking about the ships coming and going and why is it there and where's it going next, that I think people may not realize. So that was a story I was. It started with a grumpy captain with a complaint about an aircraft carrier, and ended up, I think, being an insight into something about the Navy that maybe a lot of people, even within the Navy, might not realize.
And you know what is interesting about that is that it's a lot of times a complaint or something that starts off negative because it's being perceived a certain way. And if you explain and give the context for it, it can turn out to be a very positive story. I know that when I was a carrier PAO on USS Nimitz, we had a story that was like that we had a maintenance issue that tied us up in port, and we couldn't get our sailors back in time. And then we pulled out all these stops to get them home for the holidays. And we ended up taking what could have been a potentially bad story about a maintenance issue and turned it into a good story about all the different steps and mechanisms and ways we just jumped through a lot of hoops to get people back in time to enjoy some holiday leave with their family. So I know that sometimes it's just being able to have that open dialogue with people like yourself, so that when you're receiving complaints, I know that, Nimbus was out of Kitsap, so Kitsap Sun was our local newspaper, and I had a great relationship with the reporter there, and she would always, shoot me a note and say, hey, Teresa, what do you think about this? Or I've been hearing this, and it gave me that opportunity to, check with my leadership, check with my higher headquarters PAOs, and see a bigger picture of what might be going on. And then, so leading into that, of what not to do. I certainly don't want you to share any case stories of what not to do, any real world ones, but can you talk more generally speaking? I think this would probably even apply to any experiences that you've had as a reporter, not just the military, but what are some of the ways in which you've seen organizations get it wrong when they were working with you?
I think you make a really important point, which is that candor and an easy conversation can make it a potentially difficult story not quite as difficult. There are going to be stories that are. I've never liked the word negative or positive with a story. A story is just a story, and news is just news. But there are stories. There are going to be stories that from any institution, not just the Navy, not just the Pentagon, are going to feel like they're negative, or they're difficult, or they're stories that you don't want to talk about. And the thing is, there's always some exceptions, but the thing is that generally people in a difficult situation, institutions in a difficult situation, are trying to fix it. They're trying to do something right. They've got a challenge, and and the challenge can be quite difficult one. There are going to be times when it can't be overcome, but they are doing something about it. When they're not doing anything about it, that's a different kind of story. But I would be astonished, based on my very limited experience with the Navy, if any of you have ever been with a command that had a difficult situation and was just not going to do anything about it. But it's hard to talk about that stuff. And I know it. But talking about it does help. And I don't know. We've had a situation a little bit like that just in the last day or two. One of the cruisers that is with part of the Eisenhower task force has had some problems. It was about 6 weeks ago, heading across the Atlantic. They found an oil leak, and so they headed back to Norfolk. They worked on that. They fixed it. They went out in March, I think, for just to see if the work worked, and it didn't quite. You had to come back to Norfolk and do some more work. Then last week, getting set to go underway again, man, some engineer on the ship found some gunk in an oil strainer, and that meant more time in port. At that point, I got an anonymous email, including a recording from the captain's discussion of this with the crew, which frankly I probably shouldn't have got, but I'm glad I did. And I'll tell you what. Eventually, USNI picked it up. To be honest, I wasn't quite sure what to do with it because it was an anonymous source, which I'm not typically very comfortable with. But Second Fleet said, yeah, we did find oil in a strainer, and we called in some technical experts to figure out how to address this. And we're trying to, leadership is aware of the concerns the crew has, because they're maintaining in a COVID bubble, which they've been in for quite a while now, in port. I'm sure you guys all know what that means in terms of ease of movement and the rest of it. And my anonymous source was quite emphatic about that. I talking to Mary Kate at the Second Fleet, I got both the sort of official statement, and then she decided it would be helpful to sort of say, look, here's a list of some of what we've been doing for the crew, and I hope this isn't going to make you guys roll your eyes, but I listened again to the recording of the captain's remarks, and the captain was talking in a very conversational way about a difficult thing that basically he said, yeah, we're in a pickle. If it had gotten into the reduction gear, we would have been in a worse pickle. Which is a quote that got into the newspaper, which I hope doesn't make you guys too upset. But I thought it was quite vivid, especially once I did the additional search, which I had to do because I don't know anything. What's a reduction gear? Well, a reduction gear, it turns out, is what links the engines to the propeller shaft, which makes the ship go. And so a chunk of welding slag and other chunks of metal that, if they had gotten through into those gears, that would have been a big problem. And so I think to go a little bit beyond the very careful statement about, we found this, we have our technical experts in, we're trying to figure out what to do, we're aware of the needs of the crew, to go a little bit beyond that with Mary Kate, saying, here's all of the things that we're doing to try to make this time stuck in Norfolk a little bit more palatable, and then to also make the decision, which I hope you guys won't jump on me about, is saying, when a captain can say, yeah, we're in a pickle, but it would have been a heck of a lot worse, I think is a way of kind of bringing home why the ship is there and what is a difficult challenge that's being seriously addressed. And so that's going in the background. And we may have pushed a bit beyond what folks would normally be comfortable doing. I think it was worth it in that case. And that's the sort of thing that I think is possible when we have conversations, which I think are at the heart of what is a good thing for a public affairs officer and a reporter. From a reporter's point of view, it's a great thing to develop. So, again, another long-winded story. I'm sorry.
I love it. It's a great story and a great example. And, hats off to Second Fleet to be able to bridge something where you got the tape. And, it reminds me of what happened with the Theodore Roosevelt, with the people who were recording those 1MC announcements. And it's something to always keep in mind when you're doing especially as a PAO, when we're doing any of those captain's calls or anything like that. Although we want to think that, it's going to stay within the skin of the ship, we have to be very realistic that anything our commanders or our leaders say publicly, whether on the ship or off, is something that could end up with a reporter. And it is our job, once that information is made public, to provide the context that's needed, or decide whether or not we're going to respond. So definitely that's a really good case story to highlight how a bad situation can at least be, or a less than ideal situation, let's say, can at least be explained with greater context and feedback, and then used as an opportunity to educate the community if need be. So no, I think that's definitely something to consider. So I have about one more question that I want to give you, and then I'm going to turn it over to the group. There's just a small group of us in here today. So if you guys have some questions for Dave, think about them now. But my last question is geared more towards what you think are sort of, you said something about, the core of any story is sort of how sailors solve a problem. So it sort of reminds me of the core of any story is a transformational journey, or something where something engaging or something different or something that's innovative or whatever happens. So what would you say? And I know that you provided me those 4 or 5 articles, and I apologize, but apparently I can only look at 2 of them without getting the getting the paywall, so I wasn't able to read them. But can you give me some examples, just maybe a couple that you thought that were pitched to you by a PAO and turned into being just a really gripping story, and why?
Okay. I think the one I would think of, it wasn't necessarily a direct pitch, but it was something I picked up from a dividends thing that the Ford did, and it was and this is actually one where I think maybe it's, context is part of the story. It was about their aircraft handling officer. He's the guy who. When I finally got to get out to the board, I saw he's got an office next to the flight deck. He's got a table laid out like the flight deck and little airplanes on it.
Yes.
And he's responsible for getting them in the right place up there, and then moving them from the hangar deck. I had immediately, shortly after I visited with him, put my foot in it because we went up to see the equivalent of the air traffic controller, and I was trying to well, what's the difference between what they all do? So I ask a lot of dumb questions, by the way.
They're dumb. If you don't know, you don't know.
But in part of these dividends, there was a brief mention of a couple of the sailors who work on the catapult and the arresting gear, and if you've been following the saga of the Ford, you know that those are things that people talk a lot about, and typically in the sense of there's been a fair amount of criticism in coming out of the GAO and the Congressional Research Service about how they're performing, how long it's taken to get them up to speed. It is a potentially sensitive area, and one that I think possibly from a PAO's point of view is going to be the sort of thing of saying, well, do we really want to talk about this? I'm in fact hoping to get NAVC to talk a little bit about it, but we'll see how that works out. But I thought there was something that in that story, which was not really a direct pitch, but more kind of, it felt more like the Ford talking to the Ford, that made me say, one thing I don't think anyone's ever really talked about is for the sailors who work with that equipment, their working is different now. They work differently, and so I talked to Lieutenant Commander Frayne and said, hey, can we do something with this? And she arranged a phone interview with one of the sailors who worked in the bubble for the catapult, and another who worked with the arresting gear. And so it turns out that going with this somewhat criticized electromagnetic system has got some real dividends. And it's not what I would have guessed, which was how fast can you turn around, because they still pretty much are aiming for about I think it's a once every 55-second kind of launch and recovery kind of thing. But the petty officer in the bubble was sort of saying, well, when the old ones, on the Nimitz class ones, we'd be there for 10, 12 hours, and doing what is I think a job that demands a lot of attention. It's fair to say. Um, I had at that point been on the Ford once before, and was up on the flight deck, and without really knowing anything about how a flight deck operates, you can see the scrambling around. You can see the planes moving. If you're a nervous sort like I am, you can get a sense of why this is a dangerous place that requires a lot of attention to be paid. And so when this petty officer in the bubble is talking about 10 or 12 hours of paying close attention, and then with the old steam catapults shut down for the day, and it's time for another couple of hours of checking up and making sure everything is working right. And now you don't have to do that. And you can initially sort of say, well, gee, man, that's great for the sailor. They can sleep longer at night. And then you think about, well, what's it like to be up on that flight deck, and what's her position like, which she was able to explain to me because I hadn't understood what that was before, as kind of the relay point between, I hope I have this right, the guy who hits the button that starts the catapult, and the 3 or 4 guys who are hanging around an airplane, attaching it to the catapult, signaling back, checking down towards the bow to make sure no one's wandered across that shouldn't be wandering across. Getting enough sleep and being able to pay attention is a big deal. And the result of a story, a nice story about a handling officer, a Mustang, in fact, who plays a key role in the functioning of an aircraft carrier, turned out to be a story by talking to in particular a couple of sailors about the concrete day-to-day things that they do. Mm-hmm. Luckily, I think in this case, a little bit of background because, again, of good conversations over some months now with PAOs on the Ford, and a chance to actually see, was able to put together a story that says, this thing that's been kind of controversial, the emails and the arresting gears. Actually, this is what it does. This is why the Navy's been pushing on this. This is why, at the end of the day, getting it right, which the Ford is very busy doing, is a big deal. So that was a story that, again, I'm long-winded. It wasn't a direct pitch. I should try to think of a good direct.
No, what I think you're saying though is that just having this day-to-day dialogue and being able to talk to reporters about what we're doing sometimes may not lead immediately to anything, but what it does is it creates that trust and that respect between each other, to where if we bring you out to the ship, you might see something on board that we hadn't even thought about, and the next thing you know, it turns into this other angle that is just so fascinating. I know we had Josh Farley out on Nimitz, and he used to have this show, this weekly show, Bremerton Beat Blast. And he came out and he did his weekly show, but by being out there, he saw so many other aspects of the carrier life. And so, we were able to invite the Kitsap Sun to ride our ship as we came off of our deployment. And because they had already been out there before, we knew kind of the tone and the flavor and the kinds of things they wanted to cover, because Josh had been out there before and was able to communicate that to the editor. And so, no, it definitely, what you're saying makes complete sense. It's not so much a direct pitch and, oh, I need something. It's, let's have a conversation, let's get to know one another, and let's build some rapport. And then in the long term, those kinds of things just come back to you in spades, because you're reaching out just to share and to be open and as transparent as you can be, keeping in mind the OPSEC and the certain, higher headquarters permissions and everything. But I think that's just the right way to be. So what I'm going to do now is, I know there's just a few of us, and so please don't be shy. And if you don't have any questions, that's okay too, because I know there's just a small group on the call. But I want to open it up to everyone if there's any questions that you guys have at this time.
Hi, sir. Thank you so much for speaking with us today. This is Ensign Michaela White. I just had a question about what you would recommend we either send out or how we discuss or how our discussion should be based with our civilian reporters who are coming to cover a military topic in order to best prepare them for an interview or a story that they're going to cover.
Help me out a bit, Michaela. What's your beat now? What command are you with? And just tell me a little bit about that and see if I can sort of help you a bit.
Yes, sir. So I'm not on a specific project right now, but I'm an action officer over at Navy Public Affairs Support Element East, where I try to explain it to my friends and family who may not know. I'm basically an on-call PAO for projects in the area. So they'll send a request to my command to have a PAO come out and cover a project. So, for example, I've done some DV visits on board the Ford just as an assistant and sat in on some interviews that civilians did with the COs of the ship. I wasn't much in the preparation process. I was just more so sitting in on the interviews, but I'm sure my day will come when I have to brief a civilian reporter on a ship, for example. So I was just wondering if you had any tips on that front.
Yeah, I think, well, if there's an event or a project, I mean, I'm thinking of, what's a good example? We have here at Little Creek, we have the Navy Expeditionary Combat Command is here, and actually they I got to I got to know them and to develop a I think what I hope they feel is a really good working relationship, because they did a pitch. It was like my first or second week on the job, and they said, we have these we have this simulator for a maritime security unit. The guys in the small boats with the big 50 caliber who provide like harbor security, that kind of thing, especially in hostile ports. Want to come see it? And, it was sort of a show and tell kind of thing. Pitched to everybody. It was an obvious sort of TV story. And I decided to go along, and what was really interesting to me was, again, that was a chance, because they didn't keep it kind of just passive and say, oh, we have a new simulator, here's what it looks like, here's a photograph. But we'll have some sailors there. They'll be running through an exercise on the simulator, I think the pitch was also, hey, you can pretend to be a sailor and fire the gun at the screens, which some of the TV guys liked. What was cool to me was that it was a chance to actually talk to the sailors, who were sailors with a mission I had not had any inkling that sailors did, and fairly young sailors. We were talking about I think a seaman and maybe a couple of second and third class petty officers under the command on these small boats of a first class petty officer or a chief. And so that was like an initial inkling to sort of how deep down into the ranks, real leadership and real responsibility goes. So I think, if I were giving advice about doing a pitch, I'd say, think about the project, think about the ship you're doing, and then think about what the people on the ship do. One thing I'm really eager to follow up on is came from not from a pitch, but from a video. And here I'm going to sort of underline something that maybe it helped you thinking about doing a pitch, which is that if you've got a vivid story or video or photo that you know is coming up, and I assume to some extent the PAO is going to know there's an evolution that's going to look like this, and let's go out there, send a mass communication specialist out to grab some shots and that kind of thing. But there's a really good chance that if security allows and COVID allows and the rest of it, that if you were to go to a reporter and say, hey, we're going to be doing this, would you be interested in seeing it? I think you would get a good response, especially if, at least for me, and I think for other reporters too, if you can take the extra step and say, our sailors are going to be doing this. So I have there's a video I really want to follow up on. The Carter Hall, I think it was the Carter Hall, which is I forget exactly what type of amphibious assault ship it is. But it is, they did a video kind of walking around, here's the ship. They had something with talking to one of the crane operators whose job it is to lower small craft down to the sea. Talk to the Marine who works on the well deck and figures out how to get the hovercraft and the small boats and that out into the water. And I thought, man, what a cool specialty for sailors that, again, we don't necessarily think of. I mean, a sailor on a ship who's a crane operator, a sailor who has to go over the side into a small boat several stories below on the bouncing sea and knows how to bring it into shore. One thing I still don't know is, who's driving the hovercraft and the landing craft to bring the Marines on, and what's it like when you have military personnel from two different arms on the same ship. All these are really cool stories, and those are the kind of things that if at some point a PAO is thinking, I'm going to do a nice video for sailors and family, here's what we do on the USS, whatever it is. We'll talk to the captain, we'll talk to this sailor, we'll talk to that sailor. Think about saying, could a reporter back on the shore, in Norfolk or Kitsap or San Diego, would that be interesting? Why not give them a call? And I can tell you, for any of you who are in Norfolk, if you call 880-9194 and say, hey, Dave, how about it? I will be there. It's, again, I'm new to this. I don't know what you guys know. And what you guys know is probably a heck of a lot more interesting to the general public than may be obvious to you. Michaela, I don't know if that's of any help or not. Again, I'm long-winded, but hopefully that's a little bit of help.
No, yes, sir. That was extremely helpful. Thank you so much.
All right. Anyone else have any questions?
Oh, ma'am, I have a question.
Go ahead.
Sir, so my understanding about how the best do a media pitch is, I kind of see a big thing is we got to understand the reporter, his voice, kind of his or her voice, what kind of style of stories are right. So let's say I got your pitch and everything is good to go. But from then on, what would you say, sir, are kind of the biggest challenges for you to gather a story from the civilian end? Because like you said before, sir, there's some knowledge that we have on the Navy side that is not present there, I guess, on the civilian side. How can we as PAOs help bridge? And can you give me a good example of a PAO who really went above and beyond and really helped you get that story?
Hey, I think for a minute. I'm going to try. I'm sorry. I always have a trouble thinking of think of a really good example of what's your 10 favorite records. I can never do those. I think the challenges I think come because this is what it drives me nuts about covering the Air Force Base here. Is I routinely run into operational security. We can't talk about this. We can't talk about that. And to be blunter than I should be at times when I think perhaps it really isn't an operational security issue. But what do I know? Nevertheless, that's something fairly fundamental across the OD. And so I think one of the things that that becomes a frustrating part of the civilian journalist military PAO interaction is we got from y'all's side, we got to figure out what we can say and what we can't say, and that sometimes takes time. I will tell you, I try not to be frustrated by this, but there are times when I have a query out and it just kind of, we'll get to it, and then it kind of goes nowhere. And for some of them, it's worth it doing we're just checking how we're doing on this. And sometimes it's a missed opportunity. So I think there's on my side of that conversation, and I don't think I'm unique this way. My experience working for the Reuters Wire Service probably makes me extreme, but there's this urgency. There's this story I want to do. Man, I want to do it, and I want to do it ASAP. And on your side, there's we've got to figure out what we can appropriately say, what we can say, how we can handle it in this day and age, with both with the pandemic and then before with a level of security on military establishments that we didn't used to have. And what are the logistics of it? How are we going to work it out? And I think sometimes the sense of urgency on that comes from me and from guys like me and gals like me, and the need for deliberation and care on your side is a source of frustration. One suggestion I have that might help with that would be as a request from a reporter comes in, and as then you have the challenge, one I'm pretty sure is pretty serious, although I can't quite imagine quite how cumbersome it can be, of figuring out how to make it happen, going up the chain of command, figuring out if it's within your assignment or if it's going to bring in someone else. I still haven't figured out with aircraft carrier operations, am I dealing with air land? Am I dealing with surface air, with surface fleet? Am I dealing with, and especially at this stage with some of the changes, I don't know whether I'm dealing with second fleet or fleet forces or who. So, and I imagine probably for you guys figuring that out takes time too. But if maybe in the course of you're figuring it out, if you think of saying, let me just loop Dave in and say, we're still trying here. We got to do this. We got to do that. If that's difficult to do, can we do this? Is there stuff that ahead of time maybe you need to know that I know I can answer right now? That might help with this. What I fear is going to be kind of a permanent challenge of I want it now on my side, which I know sounds terrible, or we need to do it carefully on your side. In that interim there, while we're figuring all that out, if we keep the conversation going, I think that'd probably be a help. Carlos, does that help at all? Or am I?
No, very, very much so. Thank you very much, sir.
Yeah, I was just going to say, your frustration, Dave, is an age-long issue, and please know the frustration is on our side as well. bureaucratic thing, I think, for any large organization to deal with, because something that could be an innocent issue that's not a big issue until it's ran up the flagpole, and then somebody from some other, and please guys chime in if I'm mischaracterizing this, but sometimes you just don't know until you start to explore the issue, how layered and how deep it is. And so it takes running things all the way up through air, land, or even through, Fleet Forces Command, or all the way up to or even the COCOMs, to understand where the issue is best handled. And so that's a lot of times why you don't know who has the lead, is because it could have been something that typically you had lead at the lowest level, but because of some other issue that's related to it now that you didn't even know about, it has now become a bigger issue. And so, but your suggestion about checking in with you is very valid, and getting back to you and explaining why you haven't gotten a reply, where we're at with the query, why there's been a delay, I think is helpful. But I wish I had better news for you, but I don't think you were going to solve this problem anytime soon.
Well, as I say, and I do try to, I actually do try to sort of understand. There's a chance that not every reporter will, which will probably be a source of frustration on your end. But it's also the sort of thing that if you are in a place where there is a reporter, or there are reporters who are there fairly often, keeping the conversations going, feeling free to pitch something. What's probably a good example is especially, big shot reporters might sort of say, well, gee, another change of command ceremony, do I really want to drag out for that? I will. And it's another, because it's another chance for FaceTime. But in any event, if you've got something like that and you pitch it and the reporter says, it's too small, don't, I would suggest that you not consider that a rebuff. A lot of guys on my end can be kind of, I know can also be kind of not really explain or do that good a job sort of explaining what we do, how our institutions work or don't work. But if you're pitching things and it's rebuffed, it's still nevertheless a chance to say, let's build a relationship. I'm here. Give me a call. I'm here. This day and age, we probably can't do it, but sooner or later, as COVID eases, you want to do lunch, you want to just come around, walk around the base for a bit, you want to just chew the fat. All of that, I think, will help, and will help guys like me understand the frustrations that you all may have. It may help guys like you feel more comfortable doing what Mary Kate at Second Fleet did, which say, hey, let me give you this list of the stuff that we've done. The fact that I have what I hope they consider a good relationship means that on that recording, when I did hear something that the captain asked not to be shared, I didn't share it because there's that, trust works both ways, and when you have a trust in a reporter, I think it means it may help you do your job. When a reporter has trust and good experience with you, it may mean that, I hope it means that things that are a concern of yours are understood and acknowledged and responded to appropriately. So,
no, that's great. I appreciate that. So we are coming at the top. We're a little over time, but not too bad. Unless anyone has any burning questions, I think I'm going to go ahead and close the call up for today. I'm going to make a couple quick announcements and then I'm going to stop recording. This is the sixth call that we've had since I've been the mentorship coordinator and we're doing these online courses. The goal will be one day to go back to face-to-face. We're just not ready for that yet. For next month, our May program, we don't yet have a speaker identified. So please get the word out to your units that if you have a topic or a speaker, please let me know. I will start probably late this month or in a couple weeks. I got some other things on my plate this week. Start to identify a topic and a speaker. But again, this is a collaborative process. So if you have someone who you think would make a great speaker and would be of benefit to the region, please reach out to me and let me know. And with that, I'm going to end the recording.